Thank you. Thanks for your invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to share some of my ideas. A few years ago, I have been dealing with autobiographies. I mean, the way in which people build their memory of themselves and the way in which they believe they can hand it down to generations to come by means of memoirs or diaries or writings. And I became aware that for one aspect which is closely connected with autobiography and which tells us a lot about the story of people are objects, personal belongings, objects that we collect, that we hold, that we discard and or dispose of. That's why I've been dealing with this theme, our relationship with objects, with all that objects tell about us. Objects are an essential corollary of our own life. Now I will tell you a short story. A woman who was on therapy with a colleague of mine from Paris. Now she moved from Prague to Paris many years before, just to attend the university. And then she stayed on. She lived in Paris. She had been living in Paris for all her life. Now and then she would go back to Prague to see her parents, and then the mother died, and then the father died. So only the second wife of his father was still alive. His second wife, he married after he was widowed, but she left in the house of her father where this woman lived. Now she had left some things, some objects. When she was informed that even this woman had died, she remembered that in her father's house that she had left in Prague, there were a small, very small trunk with a doll and 3 copybooks. These were the objects she remembered, she reminded of. So she immediately went to Prague, and she was not able to get there in time for the funeral service of the second wife of his father. She was a bit uncertain and a bit restless. She felt restless. But once she went to Prague and she arrived there, the house had been emptied already, and she had lost these 3 objects. So she hurried back to Paris, but she clashed with a homeless, ran across this homeless person, and she had a very severe psychotic crisis of depersonalization. But then she got to Paris and started her therapy. Now, the loss of those significant objects, meaningful to her, that she had left there to be kept, was a psychic rupture, a breakup point. So we see how the special bond, the special tie we form with some objects that are particularly meaningful to us. Now, these objects form a part and parcel of our person, of ourself. Kafka tells a story about a person, Karl Rossmann, his name, who emigrated to New York. And he tells all the, describes all the objects this person packed in his briefcase. I mean, all the meaningful objects of his life. Among all the many objects, there was the photograph of his parents. When he arrives in New York, after spending a short time in Ellis Island, he arrives in New York, and the skyscrapers sort of puzzle him. He feels lost in this city, which is so special, so different. And someone steals his umbrella, and he's very sorry because his father gave this umbrella to him before he left. And his father told him, "You will need an umbrella." So his destruction and his sorrow become even more serious, because he loses his briefcase with all his objects inside. And even this person had a terrible crisis just because of that. So I decided to tell you these short stories about two people who have a breakdown from the psychic viewpoint, just to tell you that we build our own life and our story together with objects. And you know, the children at a certain age, in order to be able to separate from the mother, elect and select a special object, one single object, just to get the illusion that they can carry their mother with themselves. At that point, they can separate from the mother, but it's a problem if they don't have their transitional object, as it is called, with themselves. The same thing happens to us. We accumulate objects, we keep them, and then now and then we dispose of these objects once we become aware that the symbolical affective value of this object has been worn out, has been used up, and has run out. Then we can separate from them. It happens when we tidy up our houses or the drawers in our house, or when we go back to the basement and we see again things, and we are, at that point, we are happy to dispose of them and separate from them. But if we are not calm and quiet and happy and satisfied with this separation, then we have really a problem with separation. And if we do that too early, then we can also feel sick and have problems. Of course, from the conservation of objects, we may infer so many concepts and suggestions, because, of course, there are some people show quite almost an obsessive trait, because they need to preserve everything, almost everything. Georges Perec wrote something really emblematic in this respect. At a certain point in his life, he becomes aware that he never preserved anything. So he starts preserving everything. The bus ticket, the bills, of course, but anything. And then, worried about the fact that forgetfulness somehow invades and swallows up our everyday life. At a certain point, he starts writing everything, what he ate, what he did during the day. At a certain point, these writings dilate so much that they almost swallow up, eat up experience itself. Now, there are also some very emblematic figures that have preserved so many things that at a certain point they had no space for themselves anymore. This is the case described by Doctorow in Home and Lumley, who are two very rich brothers who start preserving and keeping everything. One day, their car, their Volkswagen, broke down, but they couldn't scrap it, and so they, by an elevator, they were able to transport the car into their house, and they go on piling up things. But in the end, I think there was one of the two died, and the other one did not throw away the body, and then he died in his turn. So just imagine when they found him, what they found. I mean, just imagine it. And then we have people who discard everything. So now and then we imagine to throw away everything. This is a fantasy which was certainly realized and made real. For example, St. Francis. I met people who disposed of everything. I presented my book in Apulia at a festival on senses, a book on objects. I spotted out a person who was there. He wouldn't go away. And the audience went away. And at a point, this person, very discreetly, a very reserved person, came to me and said, I must tell you something in secret. I divorced my wife, and then she went away. And it was really painful for me, so painful. So I found this solution. I called an antique dealer, and then people who would empty and clean up my basement, and I gave away everything. I kept only the clothes, and with these clothes I would move from Barletta, a small town, to another place in the Brindisi area. And he told me this story, and he said, for me, I felt free again. I only kept a few photographs of my parents, and then some CDs, compact discs he was very fond of. And he made the list of what he had preserved. And he had preserved only these few things and nothing more. And he said, I started from scratch. Now my house is inhabited by objects. It is inhabited by things, but nothing more binds me to my past or takes me back to my past. Now, perhaps this is an illusion, but being together with significant objects in such situations as this one might be painful, and this can be a solution. And it was a solution for this person who thought that this could be the solution which might free him from, release him from this sad memory of a past he wanted to get rid of. Now, objects come with us and stay with us all life long, but objects also are endowed with a quality which sort of sneers at us, because objects survive to us. Our illusion to be immortal is denied by objects, because we own or become, we enter possession of things belong to people who died, or we leave our objects to people to come, and objects will have a life and a memory which lasts much longer than our own. And this is a tragedy for us. We want, really, we are not able to come to terms with that. It's the same thing when we plant a tree. We know that we buy this tree, and it's 1.5 meters high, and it may develop and become a 30 meters tree, but it will take 200 years. And this is the same feeling of anxiety, of anguish, is the feeling that we feel when we think of objects. But of course, they also give us some hope for the future. Yes, of course, also hope. But we won't see that tree once it grows up. Objects outline, sketch out the personality of the person and the time that goes by. So we have the bedchambers of our children that show certain features, and then when children become adolescents, of course, the bedroom must change, and we must take away all the signs of infancy, of childhood, and the signs of adolescence enter and become prominent. So the singers they are fans of are football, soccer matches or teams. Then when they grow up, other signs go away, are taken away, and other signs and tokens become part of that room. So when we enter these rooms, entering our houses, we are able to see and to discover so many things. When I was a professor at, I mean, all my life I've been a university professor, a student wrote a thesis about our relationship with objects, and she carried out a research. Now, she she visited 4 houses. One house was the house of an architect with 3 children. Another one was the house of a woman, a widow. Her daughter lived far away. And another house was of a couple who had had previous marriages. First thing that she did, she asked these people to tell the story of all the objects they kept there. And she asked to tell the story of each and every object. And then we discussed these stories. And we started to make hypotheses about the character traits of those people who had bought or taken these objects to their houses. And we made a lot of hypotheses about their ties and interpersonal relations. For example, in the house of the architect, full of objects meaningful to the architect, but that house would hide totally the life of the children. This is a sign of narcissism, of course, very patent sign of narcissism. And also the couple that had had previous marriages strategically chose and decided not to bring anything from their past life. But the strange thing, once my student interviewed these persons, the hypotheses that we had made were all confirmed. So the story of the objects had told us the story of these people, and it coincided with the story told by those people to my student. Now, the objects also preserve some, in psychoanalysis, it is called a special relationship with objects or persons. As is well known, as you all know, there is a transference relation. I mean, a number of primary parental relationships are then cathected onto subsequent relations, and this is especially visible in very young couples, where very often each of the members of the couple, partners of the couple, search for a partner, and with his or her own partner, there is a transference work. And so a working out allows the couple to abandon the primary identification. If this does not happen, separation occurs, because each of them lives in the past, in his past world and past identifications. Now, I will tell you briefly the story of Elena, a young woman who went to live with her partner, and Elena's clothes on the chair in the bedroom pile up, and the mound becomes higher and higher. Elena is criticized because of this disorder. She should put everything in order, but she postpones it because she says, no, the wardrobe is small. She doesn't want to tidy up the house. More in general, she doesn't want to do any work as a housewife, so to say, any domestic work. She can collaborate only occasionally. Elena had had a very psychotic, seriously psychotic mother, so all her life she had to care for her mother before going to live with her partner. That pile of dresses waits for a mother who will put that in order, but the mother will never come, so this request is displaced onto her partner, who is the maternal surrogate, and she asks him to wash up, to do the washing, to do everything. And because she is angry. Until she extinguishes that anger, she won't stop. Each day, a new dress is put there on the chair, but the request is renewed every day. And this is the story of Elena, who is always described by everybody as a very disorderly person, who always lives in a mess. Now we know that in our psychic life, it gets structured in absence. I mean, all our symbolic representational activity gets structured thanks to absence. Because if I have the object before my eyes, I don't need the representation. Perception is enough. As soon as the object disappears from my horizon, I need to create and conjure up my representation of the object that I have perceived. And this happens with the whole inner world. Our internal world gets populated by images that are built in the absence of the object. Now, thanks to the absence of people, we also understand many things concerning people themselves. Paul Auster, in one of his, in a short novel, tells that one morning, Sunday morning, he was woken up very early in the morning by a phone call. He tells his son, well, phone call in a Sunday morning are always phone calls that that must be answered because something happened. And that was true, because that phone call would announce him that his father was dead. The father was living alone, the mother had died already. So of course, he goes back to his father's house to put everything in order, to do what had to be done. But he hesitates. He says, I felt like a burglar, like a thief, burgling into the house of someone else. But little by little I did that, and looking and searching for things in the drawers, I started to discover significant things which were not meaningful to him, but they told me other pieces and parts of his story that he had never told me. So in the absence of his father and after his death, I understood so many more things about my father. And I collected and put together other pieces of his life. But then there is a moment, a significant moment. He tells and describes this moment, tells about this moment. I mean, when we emptied, once he decides that the house had to be emptied and then sold, he narrates and describes this moment. All of a sudden, the atmosphere in the house, in the little garden, changes drastically because of his decision to empty the house. Holsell tells that the house starts looking like a bad comedy of bad taste. Relatives are looting the house. They ask for furniture or porcelains, stealing the clothes of his dad. And the auctioneers went to see the goods, and even everybody, I mean, also scavengers came to clean up. And the new proprietors buy a mirror. A woman, an antique dealer, buys the old hats of his mother. An antique dealer takes all kind of things on his truck. Once they finished, nothing was left behind. Not even a postcard, not even one thought. For myself, for me, there was one moment which was worse than all the others. I understood that it was when I crossed the garden and it was raining cats and dogs when I threw a tie on the Golden Mission truck. He held more than 100 ties, and I remember that on the eve of my conscience, I could see those ties with the same clarity of my father's face. Seeing myself throwing away into rubbish these ties was intolerable, unbearable to me. So as soon as I did that, I started almost to cry. More than looking at the coffin of my father, buried into the grave, that gesture became a realization that my father had died. And I believe that in everyone's life, there is this very difficult moment in which we get access to objects, and the inheritance is not, inheriting something, not a mechanical gesture. We must be able to conquer it. We must be able to be strong enough to become the holders and the owners of those things that had been used, but we bestow a new meaning upon them, we use them differently, so we start giving those objects a new story. But there are people who fail to separate from objects. They are unable to do so, so they keep alive the most significant and meaningful objects of people who went away, who died, or who abandoned them. In the illusion, they sort of deceive themselves, trying to believe that that person is still there. And Philip Roth tells that as a writer, Zuckerman, visits the widow of an old friend of his, Lonov, his name, and he tells, lined up on the floor, I saw Lonov's shoes, 4 pairs of shoes, old black shoes, used up, very old, 4 pairs of dead men. They are there as he left them, said the widow. Do you see them every day? Every morning, every night, sometimes even more often. Don't you feel, isn't it strange to look at them? Oh no, it's so comforting. Did he ever wear brown shoes? And you? What about you? Do you wear brown? Or do you wear his shoes? Do you try to stand up in his shoes? How could you guess? Yes, it's clear. It's very human. Do you want me to give you a pair of these shoes, Nathan? I can give you a pair of these. I have collected postcards of Naples and its surroundings, ancient, old postcards, and sometimes I have bought on eBay dozens of postcards of Capri, very nice, dating back to the early 20th century, 1910, it seems to me. These postcards had been sent by an American tourist visiting Capri. They're very beautiful. Both the postcards, they are watercolors, as was done with postcards once. But the strange thing is that he sent each day, every day, he would send a postcard describing the day he had spent in Capri, and he says, today I went to the Faraglioni, and he went sightseeing, and he would talk about the wonders of this island. But the interesting thing is this sediments of memory, of experience, because memory without a story, you must tell experience in order to be able to let it deposit and settle down. And the places where he went were sort of attested to and witnessed by the postcards, which would describe the places itself, the sites he would visit. Now, let us now talk about nowadays, the present. But starting from the end of the 50s or in the 60s, something happened in our relation with objects. Beforehand, there was a continuity, more or less. Even though focus or an attention to object arose at a certain point, because in ancient times no much attention was paid. But with consumerism, something special happened, because we were flooded with objects, invaded by objects, and they invaded our houses. But more than that, our relation with objects has changed. I bought a few days ago, because there was a discount, a new cell phone, but my old cell phone was perfectly okay. So it was sort of an automatic gesture. I bought this one a bit because that's the way it is. I mean, but the special trait of consumerism lies in the fact that there has been a reversing of the relationship between production and the subject, because economy and the production had to meet the needs of the subject. Instead, with consumerism, this relationship has been reversed, overturned, and it is the subject who somehow meets the demands of economy and the needs of economy by consuming things. Otherwise, the economy would stop. And that's why we, of course, by installments or credit cards, we buy before buying, in a sense. I mean, without any advance payment, we become the owners of objects before paying for them, before earning the money that would allow us to buy them. And life goes on in this sort of swirling, this sort of a storm in which we buy and buy. And then there are some objects which would really move us to tears. For example, the jukebox or flippers. Now, objects are lonely objects, solitary objects. I mean, music, we listen to music with the headphones, and anybody may choose among thousands songs. And now, of course, I may say so many things about consumerism, but it is also true that the attention to object, that primary attention that we pay to objects, has not disappeared, has not vanished. I mean, we are not indifferent at all to a healthy relationship with objects. Consumerism has undermined a number of things, but some primary aspects have remained intact. I mean, the need for the child to take his teddy bear with him has remained there, intact. I mean, there are aspects that have to do with some basic parts of our psychic life that cannot be deleted above and beyond time or places. Consumerism, of course, played a role, but it has not changed totally our relationship with objects. And some basic premises and facts have remained. Now I will tell you very briefly a story about a Christmas evening concerning luxury. There was the dinner, ostrich, and caviar, champagne, top-class champagne, really top quality champagne, very expensive gifts for everybody. And there was a child among the others. It was a Christmas. I mean, there were almost all, I mean, there were adults and only one child. And there was this child. What happens? The child, at a point, in a context of adults who would almost ignore him, He would doze off at the time, but he woke up with a frenzied, not very natural joy. He opened up all the parcels, which then remained on the floor like the relics of a defeated army. There were all time of games and toys, expensive, uselessly, pointlessly expensive toys. He sat on a chair. He looked at the toys, but then the eye went inside and started walking in the meanders of his own mind. He was not interested in the toys anymore. There were only relics, flooding things which wouldn't arouse his interest at all.